Hello and welcome to this Authors in Conversation panel featuring the 2024 Minnesota Book Awards finalists in the competitive middle grade literature category. The Minnesota Book Awards is a program of the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library in the organization's capacity as the Minnesota Center for the Book. This year's Book Awards and the middle grade literature category are sponsored by Education Minnesota. My name is Brian Farrey. I was the winner last year in this category, and so I'm very excited to talk about this year's nominees. As we get started, we would like to take a moment to acknowledge the Dakota people, Indigenous keepers of the land on which most of us on this panel recording are participating from today. This land was reserved for the Dakota in the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux, signed with the United States in 1851, and it remains sacred to them today. We also acknowledge the Ojibwe people, fellow Indigenous inhabitants of this land. The Dakota and Ojibwe people are the original stewards of the story, in this place now called Minnesota. The Friends of the St. Paul Public Library, organizers of the Minnesota Book Awards, honor this tradition and the knowledge and values embedded in it, as we all work together to lift up storytellers in our state. For this latest installment of the Minnesota Book Awards popular Meet the Finalists series, I'm pleased to be joined by Alison McGhee, author of Dear Brother, published by Atheneum, Caitlyn Dlouhy Books, Simon & Schuster. Liz Heinecke, author of The Kitchen Pantry Scientist, Ecology for Kids, published by Quarry Books, the Quarto Group. Kalena Miller, author of Shannon in the Spotlight, published by Delacorte Press, Penguin Random House. Our fourth finalist, Kate DiCamillo, author of The Puppets of Spellhorse, published by Candlewick Press, will not be able to join us today. I just want to take a sec to congratulate you all. As I said, I've been in your position before. I know how exciting it is. In the interest of making the most of our short time together, I'm going to begin with a round robin question that I'd like each of you to respond to in turn. I'll then have questions specific to each of you and your wonderful finalist book. So let's start with an oldie but a goodie. Every author since the dawn of time has been asked this, or a variation of this question. Describe the origins of the idea for your book and why you feel this is an important text for young readers. Alison, let's start with you.
My book, Dear Brother, is part of a series. It began with Dear Sister a couple of years ago. It's supposed to be followed by Dear Dog in a couple of years. And it consists of letters, texts, drawings, journal entries from a younger sister to her older brother. The series itself was inspired, including this book, a number of years ago when the youngest of my three kids went to college, and I felt that my heart was broken. And I had, like every parent, I collected many things from their childhood that were strewn in boxes and bags. And I thought, you know, your heart's broken. You might as well just dump everything out and create nice little tidy memory boxes for everyone. And my impression of my children, deludedly, was that they'd always gotten along great and loved each other and family unity. And as I went through these zillions of mementos, I kept finding notes that I had saved, written from one to the other, things like, Dear sister, I'm supposed to be babysitting you. I'm going to Uptown, watch TV. Things like that. And so I thought, you know what? Every sibling relationship is full of ups and downs, love and hate. And how cool would it be to create a book that consisted only of letters and notes and drawings from one sibling to another? And that was how this book was born.
Excellent. Liz, do you want to talk next?
So my book is Ecology for Kids, Science Experiments and Activities Inspired by Awesome Ecologists from Past to Present. And I've been writing science experiment books for about 10 years, but lately I've been interested in introducing kids to science through story as well as hands-on activities. So in this book, I was able to combine the two. And I think it's an important and timely book. I've written books about biology, physics, chemistry in this series, but this one is near and dear to my heart because it's about ecology, which is about our relationship to the earth and our responsibility to care for the earth. And this is a subject that's very important to me. And I know I have 3 kids of my own. I know it's very important to a lot of young people today as well. So I hope this book not only shows them that there is hope for the future, but by reading about these scientists, they can see how the face of science has changed through the years. So it goes in chronological order. They can read about the people who first started doing ecology, which were mostly, wealthy European men, and go through time, and they can see how today everyone can be an ecologist. And there are a number of role models, a diverse group of role models from around the world. Kids can read about how they got interested in science, like what they loved as a kid, music, sports, art. And they can also read about why they were studying a particular thing and why their discoveries were important. And then they can do a project that's related to the work of these scientists. So I loved writing this book. It's full of photographs of Minnesota kids who came to my screened-in porch and went to Highland Nature Center with my photographer Amber Procaccini and me, and did science experiments and explored the world around us. And that's what my writing is really all about.
Fantastic. And Kalena.
Yeah. So my book is Shannon in the Spotlight. And when I wrote the very first draft of this a long time ago, a couple years after I had first been diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder, and it was sort of ruling my life. And then when I started publishing, I shared that with my agent, and she was like, Kalena, this is like 200 pages of angst about OCD. Nobody wants to read that. She was nicer. That was my interpretation of the takeaway there, which it really was. Like, it wasn't really a fully fledged story. And so then I returned to it a bit later, and I'd also always wanted to write a middle grade theater book because I love theater, and I think there's so much fun to be had there in storytelling. And I thought, let me pull those 2 things together and make this a story about a character who has OCD rather than a story just about OCD. And yeah, I love how the 2 of them came together, and I think by giving the struggles with mental illness a little bit of a backseat. I mean, it's still at the forefront of the story, but I think it speaks more to the message that I'd like readers to take away of this doesn't have to rule your life. This doesn't have to be the only thing you want to write and think about, but rather just one part of you in this whole world of your friends and your family and your community and doing the things you love. It's just like one little piece of that. And that created this. So yay.
Yay, indeed. Fantastic. Thank you so much. I gotta say, one of my favorite things in the world is hearing authors get excited about their own books. Because I think authors are really good at selling their material by saying, this is why I did this. So let's go around a little bit, talk to each of the authors more specifically about themselves and their books. Liz, I'd like to start with you. I'm always excited to see nonfiction in this category. I think a lot of people default to fiction, but when we get some nonfiction in there, that's really great. And I had such a good time reading this. I want to talk about your science background. Can you tell us about when you decided to start teaching kids about science, and tell us more about how you've gone about doing that?
Yeah, so my in college, I've always loved music and art, and in college I studied actually art and biology, but I went to work in research labs for about 10 years, did molecular biology research, and got my master's degree in bacteriology. And then I had 3 kids of my own and started doing science with them. And I really started writing at first back when, so blogs were first starting out. I started blogging, which was great. I've always been a big reader, but it was a great writing practice. So I started blogging about science, experiments you could do with your kids at home that didn't require a million trips to the grocery store or $1 million. And I got involved in science communication, started doing science on the local television stations quite a bit, mostly for the holidays, demonstrating science experiments you could do with your kids. And eventually I actually tried for a while to send out, like I wanted to write a book, but no one was interested. And eventually a publisher came to me, and it was such a great opportunity. I've just, as I've gone through this career shift from scientist to writer, I've been said yes to all the opportunities. And since then I've gotten to write a number of books and do a lot of science outreach with kids. Last week I was in New York for a new book, and I got to do science with a bunch of kids in a New York STEM program. So I've gotten to combine my love of history and reading and writing and science with some science outreach. So I've been really lucky.
That's amazing. My favorite thing about your book is how you pair the biographies of great ecologists with the various activities. There are so many people you could talk about. How did you narrow down which ecologists you wanted to feature? And if you could add a couple more to the book, who would they be?
Yeah. So it was an interesting process. I really wanted to include scientists from all around the world. So I didn't just focus on American scientists. A criteria was that I had to be able to come up with a project that I could have kids do that was related to the work of the scientists. So I can think of one. So, projects involve, going outside and making pitfall traps to catch insects, or building terrariums, things like that. But one scientist, and I wrote her name down so I wouldn't mispronounce it. It's May Diane Andrade. I would have loved to include her. She's an ecologist that works on spider ecology, but she studies the mating habits of black widows. And that just seemed a little, I didn't want kids going out and catching spiders that could possibly be, most spiders aren't poisonous, but I didn't want kids getting bitten by spiders because they were doing a project in my book. So she is a phenomenal scientist who I would have liked to include, but I really had to choose scientists who I could pair projects with their work. And it was very important to me that at least in all of my books, that at least half of the scientists who I write about are women. So half of the scientists are women. And you see, as you go through the history in the book, that you start off with mostly men. And by the end of the book, you're reading about women, about female ecologists. Because I just want to show kids that gender doesn't matter. Anyone can dream about science, be interested in science, or even maybe be a scientist someday.
Excellent. I'm sure it was a gut-wrenching job trying to winnow it down to the people that you most wanted to talk about.
There are so many interesting ecologists. Yeah, it was tough.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's pivot to Alison. Got a couple of questions for her. So your story of sibling rivalry, jealousy, and how unfair life can be really hit home for me, as I'm sure it will for countless readers. Tell us about the sibling rivalry you've experienced or witnessed, and why it seems like a universally recognizable problem.
Well, thank you, Brian. It's such a good question. And I feel as though most of my books, no matter who they're aimed for in the children's world, I write for all ages, adults on down to infants, I suppose, kind of transcend age. And sibling rivalry is one of those things that reverberates throughout your life if you're one of two or more kids in a family. And I've witnessed it my entire life, beginning when I was a little kid, having sleepovers at friends' houses. To this day, being part of a family is often the thing that brings the greatest love and the greatest comfort, and also some of the greatest and often quietest pain that people carry around inside them. Memories from when they were children. And even though those sibling relationships can change and evolve and grow over time, they don't always evolve in loving ways. Oftentimes they do, but sometimes they don't. And that pain and love, that hurt and love, is held in balance, in my observation, in many families and among many siblings, including lots of my friends. And so the idea for the Dear books, Dear Sister, Dear Brother, was born out of exactly that balance. Like, here's this person that I love with all my heart, and I always will. And here's this person who has this ability to hurt me in a way that no one else can. They know the ins and outs of our family dynamics. They know what I most treasure and love from observation, and they can use that against me, or they can use it to bring me comfort and support. And so just observing that throughout my life led to my wanting to create many, many layers in a book that is very funny. It is supposed to be very funny, and it does make so many people laugh, but so many people have written to me privately and said, I laughed all the way through your book, and then I cried, and it reminded me of so many things about my brother or my sister. And so that to me is a really beautiful aspect of writing about this sibling relationship in particular, because it just hits home in a way for so many siblings.
Definitely. When you said this was for all ages, I said, I'm quite old and I really loved it. I because of that recognition, I was like, oh, I've been there.
Yeah.
So the story and the art mesh together so well for this. What kind of conversations did you have with your editor and or illustrator regarding the tone and style of the art?
This was magic, Brian. I am stunned. I've written many picture books and many novels and unnameable sorts of books for young people that are heavily illustrated. And oftentimes, you know, in traditional publishing, you're kind of kept separate, writer and artist are, because of human nature. Writers want their words to be their words, and artists want the freedom to express what they want. And it's completely understandable to me. Usually I work more closely with artists. With Dear Brother, I was shown some various artist samples in the beginning, and I instantly loved this woman's work, Tuan Nini's work. And I said, her, if she's free. And that was it. There was no more. I never met her. I never spoke to her. We had no questions about the art. When I received the first pages, the drafts, the sketches of this book, it blew me away. You know, ideally in an illustrated written collaboration like this one is, I call it a graphic novelish. It's not entirely a graphic novel, but it's deeply illustrated. There is, you know, you're trying to make the art fit the words. In this, I felt that Tuan Nini took these words and just blew them up into this incredible book that was beyond my scope. And since then, we've become good buddies. You know, we email, we Instagram, we're just like fans of each other. And in looking at the reels and stories that she puts up on Instagram, I can just see her genius in pretty much everything she does. So this was just magic.
It does my heart as an editor good to hear an author describe their illustrations as magic. That really makes me happy. And that's exactly what I thought. I when I read this, I'm like, did Alison go to her editor with this artist in mind? Because they're so paired well, but
I did want her. I like really, really wanted her just based on the art I saw, but that was the end of my involvement.
thank you very much for that. Kalena, we're coming around to you now. Got to say, excited to talk about you. Big fan of musical theater myself. So I came with this book with a little bit of skepticism. It's like, okay, I'm going to know within 5 pages if she's a fraud and doesn't know anything about musical theater, or if she, and then you started naming musicals that I think people don't even know exist, like James and the Giant Peach. So I was like, oh, she knows her stuff. Awesome. I thought it was a very clever touch for Shannon to sing The Girl I Mean to Be from The Secret Garden as her audition piece. Confession, little side, Secret Garden is in my top 5 musicals of all time.
Oh my God,
So
same.
much of the book revolves around Shannon's quest to be just that. Can you clue us into any theater Easter eggs you hid in the story and talk about why you decided a theater story was the best way to tell us about Shannon?
Yeah, like you, I'm a big theater person, and so it was really fun for me to actually have a space for all of that arcane knowledge that I don't usually need. And the thing about musical theater lovers in particular is that they are obsessive, and they will tell you if it is not right, and they know everything, especially I think with The Sound of Music, which is the musical they're doing in Shannon in the Spotlight. I swear, I tell people it's The Sound of Music, and they're like, well, did you know that the movie is different than the music? And I was like, yes, I do know that. But there was an added pressure, I think, to have everything be accurate. And so in terms of Easter eggs, I think one thing I had fun with was imbuing some of the language of theater and technical theater into the book without necessarily explaining it. So, I mean, really, I just wanted a backdrop of sort of a language that these characters are speaking and what informs how they're conversing with each other. But it's also fun, in my opinion, for theater lovers to see a tiny little phrase that's thrown in there and be like, oh my God, I've said that before. I know what that means. And someone outside of that wouldn't necessarily know. In terms of her audition song, yeah, I got really lucky there. There are just not that many great audition songs for girls that age. And I wasn't about to pull out like Les Mis. That was just too much. And so I thought The Secret Garden struck a nice balance of being a story that non-theater readers might have some inkling of the narrative arc of, so I didn't have to do a whole, here's what I'm acting out, blah, 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 blah. And also it would fit her range. So it really worked that it was a good fit, symbolically, as well as like what notes she could hit. But that was a really fun thing for me in writing all the theater parts of the book, was watching so many different stage versions of The Sound of Music. Particularly there's one scene where they're trying to reblock a scene. And I watched like 20 high school productions of that show because I wanted there to be like an aha moment of like, this is what's going to make this scene tick. And therefore I needed it to actually look good on stage. And so I was like delving through different ways people had done it, which was, fun for me as a theater nerd. But I also hope it's fun for readers who are like me in that way.
Definitely. You connected with one reader for sure. Not your target audience, but you connected. My second question for you is, you do such a great job portraying OCD with accuracy and clarity. And I'm really interested in how you show this playing out in Shannon's family dynamic and her friendship circle. There are varying levels of support and understanding there. What advice would you give to a reader who has OCD, or maybe a reader whose friend has OCD, on navigating relationships while dealing with this condition?
Yeah, I think that can be one tricky thing when you learn something new about yourself, particularly if it's a difficult thing like a mental illness that is sometimes stigmatized. I don't know, I think kids especially are kind of attuned to which friends are good friends and who might be appropriate to share that information with. I mean, it's all about your comfort level, and where you feel safe. I think the most important thing is finding an adult or professional who can really give you the help you need. And usually that starts with parents, hopefully, or school counselors, or wherever you might be able to find that support. But with friends, sometimes it's a little bit more awkward because like they're not required to, listen to you, or they're not being paid to help you. So I think kind of using what you know of your friends to decide how to approach it. And in my experience, I don't share everything about my OCD with my friends. But I do tell them what's going on. And I find that that's really helpful because a lot of times they want to help, or they want to be there for you, and they have no clue how. And even just a little tidbit of like, hey, I need to do this. It might look weird, but like, this is why. And then it's like, oh, okay, yeah. And we'll move on. And that's one thing I love about kids is that moving on part sometimes works really well, is that things phase them a little bit less. And I don't want to speak for everyone with OCD or all OCD diagnoses, because I know a lot of times the way those compulsions can manifest is a lot less socially acceptable, or they can be taboo or not something at all that would be something you would share with friends. And I know I am somewhat lucky in that regard, in that my own experiences sort of line up with the textbook definition. So it's more palatable to people, and not everybody has that experience. But I think just communicating where you can and trusting your friends if you think you can trust them, which is sometimes hard to do, but I think kids are good at it. And I think in Shannon and the Spotlight, then even when she was, fighting with her friends about who got what part in the musical, then there wasn't a moment where her OCD was used against her or weaponized in any way. And that is sort of the model that I'd love for the world to follow. I think that's really important. It's just a part of who she is.
A lot of great insight there. Well, we have reached the end of my questions. Kalena, Liz, Alison, thank you so much for taking part in this. And thanks to all of you watching for taking part in this Meet the Finalists panel. And thanks again to Education Minnesota for sponsoring the category. If you enjoyed this talk, you can find a treasure trove of past events archived on the YouTube channel of the Minnesota Book Awards Stewart Organization, the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. You can find out more about future programs on their website, thefriends.org. In particular, mark your calendars for Tuesday, May 7th. That's the evening that the winner in this category and 8 others are finally revealed. Join us in St. Paul at the Ordway Center for the Performing Arts. Tickets are just $22, including processing fees. Visit thefriends.org/MNBA for details. Once again, my name is Brian Farrey. I've been moderating these wonderful authors, and I thank everybody for their participation.